So we are.
Okay,
Good
that's
morning.
fantastic. That was bloody quick, wasn't it? I think that was the quickest go live since we've been doing these shows.
Yeah, and funny enough, it says on my phone, we're live.
Awesome. How have you been?
Yeah, good. Yeah. Had a good week.
Awesome.
Crashing about. Trying to get some music into the mayhem, but with some difficulty. But that's always the way, isn't it? It's we'll go. Well, Dave and I, the band, we got some gigs in October. We've got actually we've got the two. So we'll be
wow.
so we're getting to battle hardened. Going from practice to rehearsal, if that makes sense.
Wow. Yeah,
We
yeah, yeah,
do,
yeah, 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 yeah.
we
Absolutely.
do
So you're
we do
doing your whole
we do
set.
rehearsal. Yeah, we do whole
Your whole
set, and you
set.
go right 1, 2,
Yep.
3, 4. You count them off and you play them. And there's
Yep.
kind of no mess about it. You've got to, and the key is making sure that's right rather than practice, which is messing about, which we're.
So do you change your set list much, or is it pretty much a standard set list that you guys follow?
Funnily enough, no, we do change it. Actually, we change it quite a lot. There's always that messing about with new songs or songs
Wow.
we'd like to do. So
Who changes it? You or the other guy? Who's the main?
Dave, me or Dave.
Dave.
Well, either of us could bring a song, and you go, how about this? I heard
Wow.
this on the radio. How about this? And you go, oh, all right, let's see if we could do it. And if you can, there's lots of parts to this, but the first key part is, can we kind of run through it without,
Yeah.
and understanding what the bits are? You wouldn't have all the bits particularly, but can you get from beginning to end a bit? Can you understand what the main bits are? So this is right, and I know what the verse does, and I know what the chorus does, and okay, there's a middle eight that we probably need to do something with, and maybe there's a solo that you need to do something. But in actual fact, I can get from one end to the other, kind of thing, and so that's kind of what we do to start with, and then you've obviously the other major thing is can we sing it in the original key? Or do you have to change the key, maybe, to suit or something like that? Because
Sure.
that's one of the difficulties, and because there's always, I don't know if you've ever done it, but there's always a high bit. There's always a bit that's up here. There's always one. There'll be one note that's like, ooh, that's very high, and then we have to see Dave has to see if he can get there. But so no, it evolves. The set list evolves over a period of time. What we played a year ago is not what we play now. You're always adding in songs and stuff like that, because part of the thing about being in a covers band is part of it is kind of seeing how it goes with an audience, but also seeing how it goes with the rest of the stuff you play.
Sure.
We always used to say that, if you're here and you go over here, wrong way. I've got, if you go here and you go over here, so you do Route 66, yeah, and then you want to do, I don't know, just be extreme about it, and then the next song you do after Route 66 has to have some kind of rock and roll element to it, if you go off and then just do I don't know, Babylon by David Gray or something like that, the two things kind of don't really fit together. So if you go off and do that, for example, if you go and do a Green Day song, yeah, you can't do it on its own, because if that's not the core of where you are, you've either got a place to go, right, we're going to play this before Green Day, we're going to play Green Day, and then we're going to play after Green Day, and there's got to be that line between them that sort of makes some sort of sound sense, and some sort of link between them in some way, so that you haven't gone just I've played all these songs in one particular genre and I've just shot over here and done one, and then I've come back and done and it's a bit jarring. So I think you have to be careful that what you're doing with that, I think, is the other major thing really that we look at when we're doing these things. But so we evolve and we change, because we're always going, hey, let's do let's do another song kind of thing. Let's do Green Day or whatever it is, kind of thing. I'd like to make it elementary. Oh, it's 10. It's all right. So kind of, yeah. Sort of, it's an evolving thing, which is fine, because when you start, you set up a bunch of songs, and when you've got enough, if you're starting mainly from scratch, which most bands do, that we start from scratch. So we got, once we got 20 songs together, you figure you can go out and gig. So you go out and gig, because there's no point not. There's no point going through a 5-year evolution kind of thing. You might as well just go out. So, you spend 6 months getting the 20 songs together, then you go out and play. And then after a period, you go, well, that's not really working. That doesn't really, or you change. Like, for instance, we started off doing it just me and Dave playing, and not any backing tracks or anything. Then we discovered this backing tracks site that Dave found where you could download just the bits you wanted. You could take out, and the beauty of it is you can mix. Once you bought it for £1.50 or whatever it is, they really are like £1.50. You can take out the bits you want. So you take out the guitar, you can take out the bass, but you can leave in, say, the keyboard. If there's a keyboards or drums, or obviously drums, but and other stuff, you can leave that in. So in effect, you're blending the two things together, which is a different thing to just us to because we started making our own drum tracks and stuff like that.
Do you loop at all? Do you do any looping?
No, we don't do live looping. No live looping. Just live getting on with it with a backing track.
Cool.
It means it's an interesting thing. Obviously, you don't improvise with a backing track. Really, there's not much improvisation to be had, but it does make you tight. It does make you on it, and it means that if you go and play with people, elsewhere, you kind of, you understand structures. You get, every band has to have a structure, really. In any of these songs, structure is the key thing. And obviously, if you've got the structure in your head, if you've got a live drummer, it doesn't matter because you know what you're doing.
Even and you can structure.
Yeah, and you could be tight with the drummer, tight with if it's a live drummer or it makes you tight.
Yeah. Speaking of tight, how did you get on with the conversation on a YouTube show that we both watch in regards to a conversation and comments made about Ringo Starr? Can I take us down that little path as a segue into the show, which is a chat about the beat? But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts because I'll let you if you can without naming names, if you want to share some of your thoughts, I'd love to echo. I think some sentiments there.
I have no problem naming names because I don't think it's not a criticism.
Okay.
It is just, I actually think it's a kind of generational thing in a way. It's in an odd way, and I see it. I can line it up with my children. My children have the same thing, and nobody's watching, right? That it's the generational thing between. I mean, Jay. We could have about Jay Hannon, 7 over 8 on Johnny Biggs.
We've got one person watching us.
And he. Because he's under 40 and he's a metal producer, writer, musician, producer. That world, if you listen to the records that are made now and the way that he talks about the way he makes records, the way he produces and the way he mixes things like that, it is done. It's all done to click tracks. It's all done to, it's all very tight. And I'll go back to my Guitar Breaks holiday, where one of the guys on it, Pat de Jong, one of the bands he plays in is a death metal band, besides a Cuban swing band. And he said about it that band, when they play live, they have to rehearse for 2 months before they play because it's so complicated and so intricate, even though it may not sound, to the untrained ear, mine, it doesn't sound like it. Actually, it's and you have to be really tight, really on the money, because otherwise, it turns into a sort of sort of noise mayhem thing, and you're all over the place. So they have to practice for like 2 months before they go out for a gig. Now, given that sort of, that kind of constraint, with the way that things are put together, the way that they work, it's very much, you record on a computer. The drums, they're all lined up to the click track, and it all has to be really tight, because if it's not tight, then it gets messy, because obviously, you're not recording clean. Well, you're recording it clean, but, you've got very overdriven guitars, bass, probably shouty vocals and stuff and things like that, which mean that.
Look, you're right, Simon. I think it's more of yeah, I certainly understand the generational component to your argument, and I'm not disagreeing with that.
But of course, that fits into modern pop music as well. Modern pop music is like that.
For sure. It's got to fit into that key, and certainly with that type of music. See, the music that we talk about on this show, it's vocal music, and the guitar is slowed up or built up. It's around the vocal. So you and I are both guitar players, and the whole idea of this show is to relate back to a guitar player. So when you're singing a song, for a fact your tempo, your right hand will slow up or slow down because you're following the vocals. The same thing with your drummer. Your drummer generally will follow the vocals too. He's got to keep a steady beat for sure, because it'll all fall apart. But that music that Jay's playing, it's got to follow.
It's got to follow.
It's a machine gun.
And so that's what he's, and we've talked about this before, the sort of the advent in the 80s of, the click track, the advent of electronic drums, producers saying, thank God I can do electronic drums to a click track. I don't have those bloody drummers waving in and out of time and stuff, and making it. Whereas you and I, I started buying records in 1972. I am what I like, what I'm used to, what my trained ear, my ear is trained to do, is to listen for the nuances of speeding up, slowing down, speeding up in the chord. The drummer brings when there's 4 people playing in a room together without a click track. I think you get something that is very different to. And I think that Jay's understanding of Ringo and Charlie Watts as well, is really funny, is the fact that he can't. And I notice with my kids, if I play songs for my kids, my teenage kids, they don't like it because for them. My middle daughter Saskia, she said it. They move around, It's got this kind of like, because they slow up and speed up, and she's not, she's into pop music, and they don't do that, Whereas I find the same thing. Listen to her stuff, is that I find that just on the beat, incessant kind of, too mechanical for me, and it grates after about 15 seconds. But I think that's what he was getting at. That and the fact that his parents weren't really Beatles fans, so he hadn't heard much of it. But what he had heard, that thing, I've said to you the other day, about that thing with Ringo playing at George's memorial thing. And what struck me was the swing, and you and I. That's what Charlie Watts is the same. Fantastic swing drummer, but see, that has no place in modern metal. I don't think. Could be wrong about that, but in Jay's world, that's not what the drummer should be doing. They should be adhering to the click track, and I think click tracks and stuff take out the swing, take out the roll. Leaving just the rock now, which is why I think it's a generational thing as much as anything else. Do you think that rings true? Because he's younger than Dave and Johnny.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if you look at Alex Van Halen, for example, Alex Van Halen is a drummer that has swing, and you listen to Hot for Teacher, for example. And it's no surprising that this guy has swing, because who the heck were him and Eddie listening to when they were growing up? Cream. He was modelling his drumming on Ginger Baker. You know,
Ginger Baker.
And Ginger Baker. We all know about, you know, Ginger Baker, don't we?
Fantastic, fantastic. Jazz drummer. Swing to Ginger Baker, a man in hospital, seeming on his last legs. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm glad we mentioned that. Thank you, Simon, because we send out prayers.
Send our thoughts to the mighty. Well, that I showed you this a long time ago. But we were. Me and my nephew made that comment about it, and we fortunately didn't make it. And we were trolled by what must be his daughter, which I think is really good. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So I feel an affinity with the mighty Baker man, and send out thoughts to him.
Certainly. He's a
but he's bloody 80 for God's sake,
Yeah, what a life.
Yeah, what a life. Yeah. It's I must say, it is an interesting thing, this, isn't it? That I was just kind of, as you do, prowling about, and it just struck me about this week alone. You've had Ginger Baker, we've had, you saw on my Facebook page, Barry Masters. I bet that doesn't mean anything to our American friends at all, but But I've got that live at the Marquee in '76, which is, I love, that Gloria with Satisfaction in the middle. We used to play that in my old band. Fantastic. Epic kind of, And I saw them in a little club in Bristol called the Granary. I don't know, 300 or 400 people, and they were fantastic. They were, Barry Masters. It had a kind of balcony that went through two ways around it was a long room with a kind of balcony bit that went like that, and they played it one, and he ran around the outside of it and stuff, and fantastic. So I'm sure that Eddie and the Hot Rods don't mean anything much to our American, which is, but it's 63, and yet you could see this week and last week at Any Money and
Rick Ocasek,
from the Cars. Okay, so and
he was 75.
Yeah,
he was. Yeah. I didn't realize he was.
You had this impression that he was kind of younger than that because the Cars were of the 80s.
Yes, it floored me.
Yeah, the other person I always think of like that is Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yes.
Do because Stevie Ray Vaughan didn't seem to be if you think about Stevie Ray Vaughan, you go 80s, don't you? Yet he was playing in bands from 1969, 1970. He was playing then, wasn't he? Was it
right through the 70s? He was,
which means that he must be old. I mean, I don't know how he would. Do you know how old
34?
Was he 34 when he died?
He started playing professionally when he was 15.
65. So 1965 he died. Let's have a look. So he's 4 years older than me. So he would have been October the 3rd. I mean, 2 days ago would have been his. What would have been his? Yes, he would have been. How old am I? Yes, he would have been 64. So, because he's, so that's interesting. I hadn't kind of realised that he, that even he, you think of him as an 80s person, like Rick Ocasek, Ocasek, I don't know. Well, you all right? But guess Stevie Ray Vaughan t-shirt, is he? Yes. But you think of him. I think of Stevie Ray Vaughan as an 80s person. Oddly, not a 70s person, and certainly not a 60s person. In his own thing. But
it's. I think it's interesting that you should mention that because we forget sometimes, or we're not aware or conscious of the fact that these cats had been playing for a long time. It's a little bit like the Beatles. We were just talking off air. If anyone watches the repeat of this show, or there was a fact that came to my mind a couple of days ago. The Beatles had played 300 shows in 1960 when the Rolling Stones were still listening to records in their parents' front rooms.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, we forget sometimes that that some bands had been playing for a while before. At what point, Simon, when we hear them, is that when they've made it, when they become famous, when they become commercial? Is that's generally what happens?
yeah. I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Because the Cars we're playing had been playing in the 60s. Rico
Yeah,
Cassette and
yeah.
Benjamin Orr had been playing. That blew me away. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know, but it doesn't that doesn't surprise me because people will have been started for you know well into. I mean, lots of people that I think had been playing, and I think in those days, of course, you did, didn't you? You went out.
Yeah.
There were clubs, there were places to play for you
Yep.
to develop as
Yep.
a musician, as a band. So you had a band, and maybe had another band, and and then all of a sudden, you get to a point where you've written 300 songs that are terrible. You've done 500 gigs that were, sometimes terrible, sometimes right. And you get it, you learn the craft, yeah. In a way that, you know, I mean, I think it does still happen, but but it doesn't happen in modern pop music. You see the great thing about the Beatles was they were a pop band, first, it hits in the charts,
and also,
man.
Simon, you guys had gigs. You had venues here in
Yeah,
New Zealand. We didn't.
no
Bands
venues.
couldn't tour. You're limited to my town to about 4 venues. But in America and England, as you know, you had the Ricky Tack. You had the Beatles were touring theaters and playing constantly. They went to Germany. So you guys have had a long reputation and a long history of going out listening to live bands.
And completely, and there was, and I've talked about this on here. There was
Yeah.
a circuit, but there was also, there's a circuit of the sort of, these municipal halls, 2,000 seat municipal. But below that, under that was, every city had clubs. The Stones used to tour the clubs. And all those bands in the early '60s that went on, the Animals, all those bands you can think of went up and down the M1 in their vans, going to Newcastle, play student halls, very strong on the circuit. I mean,
Wow.
yeah, universities all had kind of,
Wow.
concert halls that bands went to play in all the
What about
time.
workingmen clubs? Did these guys go and play in workingmen's clubs? And
They did. Working men's clubs are a bit different. I think that in that, yeah, they certainly were places where people could go and play. I think the kind of working men's clubs had a bit more of a sort of, you had a band and then you had a comedian and so it was a bit more of a variety show, if you like, yeah,
like a
a
show
bit more kind
band.
of, yeah. Well, you would have a show band, yeah. So you might have a covers band and stuff. You might have a band that that, and I'm not saying that people didn't go and play those things, but I think it maybe they probably did. But if you're turning up as sort of long-haired, I don't know, if you're free or something,
Yeah.
turning up, maybe that's not quite. We're talking
not going to fit in a workingmen's club.
Not going to fit in, but
at Leeds University, yeah.
But but you go back to the Beatles time. You got working men's clubs, and certainly they were. If you're looking for places to play, places where people are, they're sort of the chicken, fried chicken circuit. That's where they are, and that's where it's happening. And you go out and you learn your trade, like the Beatles. In Hamburg, what you're doing is you're playing in bars and learning your trade. And I think that that in a way that probably doesn't happen now, if you see what I mean. There aren't many venues in Bristol to play. For instance, where I live in the UK, in Bristol, there are not that many venues where you can play in pubs, which is fine. But there's probably only, a bit like you said, there's probably only 3 or 4 venues in Bristol where the Colston Hall and the Hippodrome are big, but the Fleece and Firkin, which my friends run, has 500 capacity, 600 capacity, that kind of thing.
Wow.
So, but they're becoming fewer and far between because what happens is that the inner city regeneration of the last 30 years has meant that, all of my friends own this pub called the Fleece in Bristol. It's quite a well-known venue in Bristol, but all around it they've built apartments, and where residential apartments. But of course, we all know that rock and roll pubs and residential apartments don't go together very well, because rock and roll pubs are loud, and residentials want, peace and quiet and sleep, and those two things don't necessarily go together. So, there is a friction between the two things. Developers are developing these inner city things with, as I say, with new apartments and office blocks and things. What they don't want is a blooming rock and roll pub ruining the neighbourhood.
I just want to share this bit of information, and it's related to what you're talking about with touring and making a living when you're a band in the UK, which again fascinates me. So I'm quoting this from a book called "I Want to Tell You." It's a definitive guide to the music of the Beatles, Part 1.
Right. Okay, Part 1, yes.
Yeah. Now this guy, the author, in 1962, the typical pay the typical pay for a Liverpool group was £5 to £7 per night.
Yep.
On March the 26th, 1962, a night when Ringo was substituting for a sick Pete Best, the group split £36 between them for a lunchtime gig at the Cavern and an evening show at the Kingsway Club in Southport. So they're talking about how Brian Epstein got them gigs that paid good money.
Yeah. And £36 is not, in 1962 is good money. 62?
To be split by 4 guys.
Yeah. I mean, because that could easily be, well, what did I get? What did you say? £36?
Yeah.
So you're probably £8.50 each, which is £8.50. If you line that up against when I started work in '76, I worked in a clothes shop when I left school, and I got £13 a week. Wow. So they're earning in 15 years before. They're earning in one day, or one gig. They've earned more than half my salary for a week.
So tell me, Simon. So the Cavern having lunchtime gigs. So what were you English cats doing at lunchtime? You'd go to work, have an hour for lunch.
Go to work in the office. Yeah, go and watch a band. Yeah, go and watch the Beatles play in the Cavern. That's what they used to do.
And then go back to work.
And go back to work.
Have a couple of pints and go back to work.
Well, no, I don't think. Well, I don't. I have a feeling they weren't. Drinking lunchtime drinking culture is a whole nother episode, but I don't think there was much in the way of drinking went on. Maybe the blokes did a bit, and I think maybe.
But it certainly was going to watch the band. People were paying.
Yeah,
that's what they.
Yeah, people paid money in the lunchtime to go and see the Beatles in the Cavern.
Wow.
And maybe say a lot of other Merseyside, Mersey beat bands as well. The Big Three and Jerry and the Pacemakers. They all did them. Yeah, lunchtime gigs. You see, well, because as you could tell, it's quite lucrative. You get £36 for a lunchtime gig, and then you go and play one in the evening for the same money. You've got 16 quid for a day. Well, that's in 1961. That's pretty good. 62. That's pretty good money, if you ask me.
So live entertainment has always been something that the average British, ordinary kind of guy, girl demanded. They wanted to see live acts. That was a big part of your social life.
Oh, I think I mean we're going to get into this in a big way, but I think that it's linked into the whole kind of thing, the post-war economic boom. So in 1961, you could leave school. If you left school with O levels, the 16, you could get yourself a decent job with that, decent money. And
wow.
The interesting part was that people, post-war, the post-war austerity had finished. The sort of rationing and stuff that had gone on after the war, and make do and mend and all that stuff had come to an end. And these kids, as they were, born post-war, pretty much, or baby boomers. They've gone out, 16. They've got a job. They've got a bit of money. They've got some economic freedom. Suddenly, the youth is a market. Is a market in a way that it never had been before, and I think that it's interesting that that these things follow the market. So pop music is something that suddenly discovered in post-war that it had a teenage market, and
so if you were a promoter and you had a big warehouse, you could turn that into a club and make some money because you had you had customers.
Because there were customers, because for the first time there is a teen market with money, disposable income. Going out, spending money, going out at lunchtime, getting a sandwich, and go and see the Beatles for whatever it is, 2 and 6 or whatever, because that's how much. That's how interesting things were then, and how they could, because they had disposable income. That's why there's a boom in 60s fashion. These things all linked together. That the people bought record players.
Sure.
Not radiogram. They bought stereos. They got
Sure.
And you can see that all those things is the start of a sort of, if you like, a technology consumer boom. I think that post-war thing, and I think that it's very important to recognise that that's sort of a background.
So the post-war boom, when we talk about that from a social economic reality, as far as trade and stability for political countries and having influence in developing countries, certainly had an effect on rock and roll.
Completely, yeah. It's it certainly has an effect on it. It's amazing, really, that you have to tie it all in. As I say, the Beatles came along at a time when there were a lot of young people. There was a kind of separation between people born before the war. We could see, the unrest of the 60s. The kind of hippies, the kind of all that stuff. Leading up to that. People started to be interested in fashion. So there were young fashion designers designing stuff for young people all of a sudden. It wasn't, if you think about pre-war, you see a photograph of people pre-war, and they, suits, anybody over there, tweed suits, kind of, very. I was looking at some pictures of my great grandmother, Sarah. So, so she was born in the late Victorian era, and these amazing photographs of, lots of them in these kind of very long, obviously, foot length dresses, kind of, they could have come from the Victorian era, and these are photographs from the 30s. But, it's kind of, and they all looked immensely miserable, depressed.
Can I ask you a question then? So can you point to a couple of things in your mind that were critical in establishing the Beatles as a public act? So let me just paint the picture for you. So you had rock and roll in the late 50s. You had rock and roll. You had Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and then you had the Beatles come along. Now this is in the UK, in England. You never had that group phenomena in America. In America, you had Del Shannon. You still had the rock and roll guy, the single guy with a couple of guys behind. So what specifically about the Beatles gripped the young people in Liverpool and in the UK? Because they could have easily have been just a passing, they could have just passed Simon. They could have just
Yep.
So what specifically do you think was the key ingredient for them being successful?
Do you know, in terms of national success, or international, actually the advent of television, pop music on television and on the radio. So I think that if there's one thing that I'd say is, the Beatles appeared on television. And if you think about particularly, and this is the best example, is, when the Beatles played on the Ed Sullivan Show, what was it, like 120 million people tuned in?
Yeah.
I don't know if I've got the figure right, but it was, like a third of the country tuned in to see them. So that's the first time. It's the same thing for Elvis. Elvis appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. Korea, boom. So I think that that in global terms, that and obviously they'd appeared on television in the UK, the Raw Variety Performance or whatever, and doing those things. And appearing on people's shows, like, I don't know, you have comedy shows, like Morecambe and Wise. I don't know if you've heard of them. They were a sort of comedy duo in the 60s and the 70s.
Oh, yeah, it's a big, mate, we're a colony. Yeah. We're a colony of the UK. We got all those bloody programs, mate.
But I'm producing something from 50 years ago. Given if I produce Morecambe and Wise at work, there'll be a whole swathe of people and the two Rhines. There'll be a whole swathe of people going, "What the is he talking about?"
Monty Python.
Monty
Python. Yeah, you've got the whole lot, mate. And Blackadder.
Blackadder.
Some mothers do have them.
Oh yeah. So all right, I'll take it back then. So we're fine. Okay. So Morecambe Wise.
So we're just spoken code then.
Yeah. And anybody under the age of 50 is going, "What on earth are they talking?" Ooh. Anyway, so yeah, I never take these things for granted, because I've been caught out too many times. You produce a name out of a hat. I have a team of people who work for me, yeah. And there's a woman I've got working for me, and she must be late 30s, right? And I remember saying to her, well, no, but I said to her, I made some comment about Jimmy Page, right? And she looks at me, and I'm going, "What?" She says, "Who's that?" It's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Who's that? So I have to do my sort of aged affronted act. I have to do my aged affronted act. You mean you don't know what? Your cultural knowledge is gapped, But she's got no idea. She maybe heard of Led Zeppelin, but really got no idea what they are at all.
Maybe.
And as for the individual members' names, not a glimmer. Now, after these kinds of experiences, where you're the old bloke. He's off again with his nonsense, you turn. So I don't assume that anybody's heard of.
Nobody knows anything.
Morecambe and bloody Wise. Who are they? Yes, what are you talking about now, an idiot? But those kind of going back to those variety shows and all this, on TV, they always had music acts.
Yeah,
the Beatles appeared on Morecambe and Wise. So I think that I would say the advent of Ready Steady Go and pop shows like that, which the Beatles appeared on and the Stones as well.
Yeah.
Actually, they're probably the key things, because that's in the UK. I don't think the Cliff and Co add a bit, but I think besides touring, and that's not and certainly later touring became the thing. You went out and you toured and you did the student circuit and you did, and as I said, you did clubs, you did the student circuit, then you did maybe the municipal halls if you got a record deal and stuff like that. But I think the number one thing that made the Beatles a success is television. And I don't, whether you could say that into previous generations. I think you could, but in rock and that rock and roll sense, but because then before that they were just a regional band, big in Liverpool. We've all had that, big in Liverpool, anywhere else, and getting out and touring, going around and playing, and they obviously did that, to get a baseline audience and stuff. But to impinge in a national way, I think took television. I think sort of the other basis is obviously Brian Epstein having a record label, a record shop, because he had a record shop.
Sure.
There's a certain element of locally you can promote your band's records and stuff, and sell them, and and you can have a local market, you can build a local market for that. But I don't think Brian on his own with his record couldn't have built a national market, in the way that I think appearing on television probably did for them.
Yeah. I actually, I think you're right. I don't think we can discount the role of television. The fact that we're going to agree that they're phenomenally great musicians. They'd honed their crafts. They've been playing together for a long time. They were songwriters. They may not have known music theory, but they knew keys and how to play different songs in different keys, which is mind blowing. We've got to remember that, these guys were 17 years old and they were working that out. So what song are you singing? And if you listen to some of those anthology chit chats that they have there, where I think it's Yesterday, and Paul is saying, for you, it's an F. So he's obviously talking to John or George, saying that for you, it's an F, but he's playing it in a G because he's got his guitar tuned, and so
he's got drop tuning, is he?
Whoa!
Can we blame Paul McCartney for drop tuning?
So when
he's first.
Yeah. So that's amazing. These are young guys who have worked all that out, and we've discussed this a lot with a lot of the bands that we follow. There's this instinctive ability to understand music that I never had. Everything I learnt, Simon, someone showed me, or I learnt off YouTube. I could never say that I worked it out myself.
No, and I think that one of the key things is, I was thinking about this, that one of the key differences, you're right, is, and for the Stones, what you hear them say always is, we put on the record and you slow it down to 16 to see what people were playing, and you went, put it back, play it again. It was a kind of manual play it again process. Try and work out where somebody's starting, where they might get. It's all about ear, training your ear. Ear training. And so that you go, oh right, that's there. All right, that's probably going to go. Oh yeah, there we are. And yes, ear training, and you hear all of the, it's a famous thing about Keith Richards saying, we used to get the records and we play them, and then we learn them. And Eric Clapton, spent months, John Mayall's blues collection, going through and learning stuff, blues, playing those blues records and playing along with them and working out what they played, and that's an organic learning thing. That's using your ears to work out an approximation about what somebody's doing. Now, I think, you get to a certain point in the 70s, and it's not about your ear anymore. It's about, can you read tab? There are people by then who are giving you lessons. You can go and have, by the 80s, you go and have somebody who could teach you rock guitar, not, Bert Whedon's Playing a Day. I don't know if that means anything to you either, but, where you learn, Mary Had a Little Lamb kind of thing. But yeah, that it's just a different thing, isn't it? Then you're not ear training. It's not about you and what you put in, it's about what it is, how right it is and what they're actually doing. Until you've got tab and you've got teachers and stuff like that, which is a different thing, I think.
Well, yeah. I think it's fascinating, and being a guitar player myself, that's what I find fascinating, because I've got this ability. They weren't scared, Simon, to sit there and play these different chords, and then Simon would say, "That's it. That's the chord. That's the chord that we're hearing. What's that chord, Simon?
Yeah, completely.
And it's a chord that shouldn't be in. If you follow authentic music theory, that chord shouldn't be in there. There's a famous example where James Brown, his piano player, is playing a couple of chords, and they stop the recording process, and the producer's saying that he's playing a D where he should be playing an E, and James Brown turns around and says, "But it sounds good to me."
Yeah.
Who does it sound good to? Me.
Never mind what it theory-wise, in practice sounds great. Leave it. Yeah. Oh yes, you've got that kind of the field versus the sort of the technical thing.
And George Martin never stopped them from doing that because, as you know, he was classically trained. He was a classically trained musician. He knew, but he even stood back. He had the nut. Is it nuts? The courage? What is it, Simon, that he had to say? Okay,
the balls. But I think I think actually, to be honest, it's a bit different to that. It's actually about. There's a sort of British kind of reserve thing, isn't it? You're sitting there going, well, I don't think that's going to work properly. But I won't say anything yet because that would be bad. We can't have a confrontation about and whereas I think more kind of brash, straightforward might have had a bit more of a fight about it. But I think there's a certain element of British reserve that in a funny kind of way stopped because he then didn't challenge things. Then they got through, and because they get through. And you're right. The key thing is sounds good. He could recognise if it sounded good. That probably had some good effect, if you sort of mean, rather than detrimental.
Yeah.
Just while we've been talking, I've just had a look. The average yearly pay in the UK was £800 a year, which is what? Oh God, £20, £40. That seems quite a lot actually. So no, what that would be? Divided by 10 is 79, 80, 85, 10. So yeah, it'd be £10 a week roughly. No, it can't be that.
Wow.
A bit more than that. Do what? £12 a week. So so just so we're so in effect, as a rock and roll musician, if you earned 16 quid, that's more than a lot of people earned in a week. In one go. I'm getting rubbish bloody in my own free time. Let's just.
Can I ask you about another theory that I've come across, Simon, recently? Do you think what do you think about the argument that the Beatles wouldn't have made it in America as far as recording, as far as that whole process of recording the Beatles and Please Please Me, they wouldn't have made that record because they were. Have you got an opinion on that?
That's interesting. Yeah, would they have made it in America? Does the old saying "cream always rises to the top"? Would they? What if they'd gone through? But I mean, it's a really difficult question, isn't it? They had the quality, they had the songs, they had the look, they had they had the things that you needed. I think they probably would have done. I think they probably would have made it. Somebody would have picked them up. It's difficult to know, isn't it? Because America's such a different. If they were born in, let's be real, 1960s Wisconsin or something, maybe you didn't, you'd been in the Midwest, not many places to play. You have to drive a long way to get somewhere to play and stuff like that. I mean, if you think about it, the thing about the UK is that, if you're in Liverpool, the furthest you have to travel anywhere is probably, I don't know, 300 miles. Probably drive 300 miles in Wisconsin. You haven't gone out of Wisconsin yet,
Yeah.
So, to get to the West Coast, to get where the hip happening clubs play, stuff like that, you've either got to move there, yeah, or, if you're close enough, you've got to drive there. But that could take you several days to drive there, and, going back and forth would be really hard work, I think. So I think that and because America is quite regionalized, you could be big in Texas and not be big anywhere else. To get national is a different thing. So I think that part of size is part of it. Being Liverpool as being a sort of a place historically where music came to because of all that naval trade. Liverpool was a big port. Things came from America to America. But nobody travelled to America then. Really, it was so difficult to do. So I think that actually that small size probably contributed to them being able to get going. And I think that but in a city where there was this kind of explosion of pop culture, in all its forms, that they rode the crest of that wave and they were part of it. They made it, but there, as we said, there are a lot of other bands that came out of there, riding the same wave, doing the same things, and I think that they actually, that they would have had to do the radically different things. So maybe they, being discovered in 1961 in America. I have no idea how difficult that would be or whatever.
I think they would have done well if they were touring in America. But I think I'm partial to the discussion where some people are saying that when it came to recording the albums, their first two albums especially, they wouldn't have had that result. They wouldn't have because the producers in America still at that time were certainly dogmatic in their approach and determined to enforce
keep
their
control.
Point of view.
Yeah,
keep control. Whereas, and we've mentioned this a few times already. George Martin certainly is somebody that I'm going to research over the summer break a little bit more. Certainly had a role in allowing, because all the people who have heard the Beatles live said that those first two albums were pretty bloody good, Simon. They did a good job of capturing the essence of how they sounded.
Yeah, live. Yeah, completely. Yeah, yes. No, I completely agree with that. And I think, but I was just trying to think of. So the trouble is, I can't think of any comparable American bands who broke at the same time.
No.
I think that that post Beatles, everyone, the Byrds, and they all were affected by the Beatles turning up. Everybody talks about it. That the Beatles explosion in America. Coming to America, and obviously Dave Clark 5 and
maybe the Beach Boys.
The Beach Boys. Yeah, that's true. But because they were on the West Coast. They were already in Los Angeles. They're already in kind of one of the areas. One of the San Francisco was going to be and that West Coast is going to be, So I think the coast bits of America are different to the middle. Yeah, and it's a bit like being in London or not being in London. And I think that that the Beatles not being in London, is a bit like the Beatles being in, as I've said, in Wisconsin. Apologies to anyone who's in Wisconsin, but that in the UK, Liverpool's I don't know 150 miles from London, kind of thing. Not very far. Even in those days, you could do it in a day.
Sure.
Whereas, as I said, in Wisconsin, but I think if, and it's interesting you pick out the Beach Boys as being similar sort of era, and of course they come from the West Coast. They come from Los Angeles, that area, which is where there would have been a record industry, since the West Coast centered in Los Angeles, but it's not centered in Wheeling, West Virginia or something. It's kind of it's and I think that bands that came from there, and if I think of things like the Byrds and people like that, they were based there, weren't they? West Coast. I mean, that's why there's that West Coast. Later, there's that West Coast you know, and the Wrecking Crew and all those guys, they all recorded in Los Angeles, didn't they? You know, that's where they were based, and not, you know, not anywhere else. I mean, Motown, Detroit, I suppose. You know, so there are regional, you know, areas of regional stuff. You know, and obviously
there's a new documentary that's out. It's not available here in New Zealand, Simon, called Echo in the Valley, and it's about Laurel Canyon, and I can't wait to see that. The reviews are outstanding. So you know,
but,
that'll be interesting to see how that relates back to the Beatles, because that most of those bands that we're talking about were influenced by the Beatles.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. You know, but I think that probably, you know, as I say, I mean, even people like, you know, Bob Dylan. See, Bob Dylan was born in Hibbing, Minnesota. You know, which is you know, middle of the country, middle, you know, up near the Canadian border. Yeah, but he moved to New York. You know, to make music. You know, to make a career in music, he moved to New York, the other place he went to. You know, because they were obviously record companies, studios, all had, you know, New York offices, and they had LA offices, but they didn't have Hibbing, Minnesota offices.
No. And you know, the coffee house was a venue, you know, that was big. You know, so he could go and gig and play. Greenwich Village was a hub of activity for a lot of the young people. Yeah.
But also,
you know, so he was going somewhere too where there was certainly an audience.
Certainly that, but also on the back of that, and not of that kind of hip, you know, New York audience, whatever. Sure. Is also the critics.
Sure.
You know, people then wrote about him in, you know, Rolling Stone or the you know, the Village Voice or whatever, you know, or the New York Times, because funnily enough, the New York Times is based in New York. The New York Times is not going to write about him if he's in Hibbing, Minnesota.
No,
because they ain't got anybody. No,
because the world revolves around New York City, Simon.
The Hibbing Herald might have written about him, but I made that up. But you know, the New York Times. You're right. You know, you get a review in the New York Times. You know, that has a cultural resonance that being written about in the Hibbing Herald does not have. And
no, that's a good point.
You know, I think that that I think probably America more than. And it'd be interesting to research this more in more detail, really. You know, see where people actually broke from. You know, so you know you've got the musical centers, haven't you? So you've got New York, LA, you've got Chicago, Detroit in the Motown, and Iggy Pop and all of that stuff. You've got New Orleans, sort of jazz and kind of that Southern blues stuff. Memphis, of course, Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Presley and all of that. Nashville for country. So you've got these kind of a few places that you had to move to make it in the music industry.
And if you're Jimi Hendrix, you had to fly across to London.
You had to fly across, but Jimi Hendrix, he'd done the Chitlin circuit, and he played in New York and stuff like that. And that's where that's where Chas Chandler saw him. He didn't see him in Hibbing, Minnesota. He saw him in New York. I rest my case, Your Honor. that actually that's the key thing. Playing in New York. Yes, he had to come to England to get to sort of start his own three-piece thing and do that. But he wasn't discovered, and by Chas Chandler.
Not on the Chitlin circuit. He was, Linda Keith said, "Come along and check this guy out."
This guy out, but in New York, not in, as I said, nowhere, Nebraska. And
sure,
if you're from nowhere, Nebraska, you have to move to one of the music centers, and LA, because it's got the film industry and all of that in it. That's where one of those centers we mentioned. That's
it's the same analogy here in New Zealand, Simon. To make it big, and all the big New Zealand bands that made it big, that had an influence, all went to Australia. You could be really popular here in New Zealand. You had to go to Australia, and if you made it in Australia, well, that gave you the stepping stone to
other
the
places.
international. Yeah, to the. But you're right. Yeah, you've got to go, and I suppose that comes down to the courage of the band, the management that a band has, because to pack up, everything and move. Interesting enough, though, at what stage did the Beatles leave Liverpool and come to London?
Well, I was just going to say, where did they record? Of course, they recorded in London, Abbey Road, or
that's right.
Yeah, EMI with George Martin, who's based in London. So in effect, to be successful, they had to do what we've just described. They had a sort of regional success and a regional following, but to get a national following and to get, let's not forget, that "Love Me Do," limped in at number 17 in the charts.
Sure.
It kind of, when it was first released, it wasn't, later of course it took off, but the top selling single in the UK in 1962 was Frank Ifield's "I Remember You."
I know that song too.
And Cliff, Cliff Richard with the Young Ones, but yeah, kind of single solo artists, singers. I mean, the Shadows backing them, but yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? That you've got to, but they had to go to London to record. That's where the recording was. There wasn't, EMI weren't based in Liverpool. That's the one thing, and no other record company was based in Liverpool or Manchester or Bristol or anywhere else. They were all based in London. If you wanted to record, you went to London, and if you think about all those bands, everybody, they all, wherever they came from, they recorded in London, Basing Street Studios or Gold Star or somewhere. And I think Abbey Road, and I think that's really important to remember, that all those regional bands, Pink Floyd, came from Cambridge, moved to London, to make it, you could go on this, but yeah, they all moved to London. The one thread in probably every band story that you've read ever is, and then we moved to London.
Sure.
Then I moved to London to find, to get a gig, to find a band, to get a deal, whatever, and we've all heard, I must have read that countless times, which is the same as in America. I think, you've got to move to where it is.
How are you enjoying the series? And I'm just going to sort of segue into saying that I'm going to have to leave soon.
Yeah, you have to run. Yes,
I've got a couple of things. But are you still keen to continue the discussion on the Beatles? Do we want to get it? Like I know, have we set the scene a little bit? Do you think?
I think that's the thing we need to do, and we've talked about it a bit today. That kind of setting the scene, and but I think there is a kind of, there's a whole kind of post-war economic, sociological, cultural revolution that's going on. That contributes to the Beatles. What they're doing, where they are, and their success and things like that. It probably needs, and as I said, we talked a bit about it on this today. But yeah, I think we need to maybe have a mutter about that as well, because I think it's interesting.
I'm keen to keep talking about the Beatles because I'd love the shows that we get. I'd love to talk about their gear, because I know we've had shows we were in the past with the Rolling Stones and we've spoken about their gear. I'd love to talk about the songwriting. I'd love to hear your favorite Beatles songs, and something else too, for shits and giggles. Your worst 3 Beatles songs, because there's a few of them. They wrote over 200 songs.
Clunkers.
Yeah. They've got some gems, and if you're a true Beatles fan, you have to be objective and say, well, look, there's some clunkers, there's some bad ones. I'd be keen to hear why you think they're bad, and I think most of us are going to say number nine. Number
nine.
No, my
But
gosh.
You see, it's interesting that, isn't it? Definitely the word bad. You see, for me, a lot of the Beatles, it's neither kind of bad nor good. It's just some things worked and some things didn't. But actually, in that musical development, and you just, that brilliant thing, and I think it's, well, yeah, that's right. You put it out, you put it out, and you put it out, and if some of it, throw enough mud at a wall, and some of it will stick. It's an unfair, but it. If you go to the White Album and stuff like that, there are slight songs and stuff like that, songs that just sort of almost like nursery rhyme songs and stuff like that, Rocky Raccoon and stuff like that, which I think is great, because I think it shows the band in everything they do, and not just these days that wouldn't get on a record, we talked about Yellow Submarine, that kind of or Octopus's Garden, they just put these things on. Just put them on.
Fans loved White Album, Simon. White Album, when that first came out, sold more than Abbey Road. The fans loved the White Album.
Loved it, So, but you see, my point is, that in when you go back and listen, you go, God, that's a bit. But actually, what I admire about them the most is the fact that they recorded a song, and there's nobody sitting there going, "Oh, I don't think you should put Octopus's Garden on there. That's a bit of a silly song, in it, or whatever." They just did it, Yellow Submarine. They just put it on, and and say, it's just saying, well, we do that. And we do this as well, and there's all these sides to us, all these different songs, all these different, styles and things like all mixed up. I think it's great to have, and I think things like, if you listen to an album, if you listen to an album, or you need lighter things on an album, an album should be light and shade. So therefore, in the context of a whole album, Octopus's Garden is good because it's a light, it's a light, frothy thing. It's not all heavy and kind of,
What do you think about the theory that none of the Beatles wanted number 9? They begged John not to put it on the album, but John Lennon, being John Lennon,
put it on.
It was more of a statement about John Lennon and the other Beatles than anything to do with John Lennon describing or expressing something artistic.
I think it might be both. I'm in that kind of, we've talked about the avant-garde influence. That it should go on because it's an expression of my artistic statement. John, but it's rubbish. Yeah, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that being very true. Yeah, it's rubbish, John, but I don't care. I
want it on because it's something about me, where I am this particular time. It's an artistic statement,
Sure.
and and if he's interested in the avant-garde, he's met Yoko Ono and all those, and Yoko Ono's records are fairly extreme,
Sure.
that actually you can see that, that he wants to make a statement about, look how avant-garde I want to be.
Look at me, baby. Yeah. I'm avant-garde.
I want to be avant-garde artist, and I think, fair enough, I get it, that, if you want to be seen as an artist, you want to put stuff out that is difficult and weird and actually John's not very good, and the others, I mean Paul McCartney has much more of a pop sensibility, be going, yeah, John, where's the tune?
Rubbish.
It's rubbish. I see that completely. That kind of that butting up of two different, ideologic, artistic ideologies. Completely, yeah. John going, I'm having it. Yeah, John, but it's rubbish. But who's to say? And I think in a way he's right. Who's to say it's rubbish? Just because Paul McCartney says it's rubbish doesn't necessarily mean it's rubbish, and doesn't mean that somebody out there is not going to get something out of it. Both in terms of it may be somebody's favourite song. It may kickstart somebody's that somebody's career. you know that thing about, you know, the first Velvet Underground record sold 5,000 copies, but every one of those copies was sold to a musician who went off and formed a band.
Yeah.
My point, you know, and that's my point, really. You know that
apparently all these hippies would buy that album, you know, and sit there, and they would have LSD parties, and they would try and decipher, and they would have, like, you know, Simon would talk for 20 minutes on what he thought number 9. But yeah, and like I would
accusing me of
yeah, but if you think about what young people were doing back then, and what rock music was, and what the Beatles, of course, and we're talking about it 50 years bloody later. We're still trying to work out what's
going on, you know,
what's going on. So why wouldn't some young
underestimate? Oh, that's right. And one can never underestimate the influence of drugs on expanding your mind and seeing, you know, that,
yep,
you know, and that kind of optimism in the 60s and stuff, and he's still very optimistic, open, you know, everything's going on culturally,
sure.
You know, and in that cultural, you know, position, atmosphere, you know, that something like number 9 is, you know, is a perfectly valid artistic, this is where I am, this is what, you know, it's like, you know, and 50 years later you might go, God, that's rubbish, you know. But you're putting, you know, we are in 2019. You put a 2019 sensibility on it. Yeah, that's a completely different thing to what it was when it was released. You know, as you say, you know, you're not sitting around in parties, you know, smoking a lot of dope and taking LSD. Going, hey, wow, man, number 9, yeah, wow, you know, it's really crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and kind of, you're right, putting that kind of, you know, and you know, those kind of brilliant, the things you have to do when you're a kid, you know, smoke dope and stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning and talk bullshit for hours on end about, you know, the state of whatever you can find, you know. Anybody who hasn't done that, I should be suspicious of them as a person. You know?
Well, absolutely. Because, I remember asking my friend, you know, what do you think the song's about? And then one of your friends telling you, and you go, wow. You know, because we didn't have the internet. And I'd go home and I'd play the record and go, oh, yeah.
Really? Yeah. But don't you think that it's one of those great things about those records is that, and they all did it, you know, that your interpretation is unique to you. And you go, it means this to me. Never mind what it means to anyone else. And you are free to put your own interpretation on it, and that because nobody is, you know, as you say, you never read any. You think, you know, what does number 9 mean, John? You know, and you never saw interviews with that. You could, you know, once if they were in Rolling Stone in 1969, you know, if you're turning up in 1974 and listening to it. Well, you haven't got any reference points, you know. There's no real books. There's no internet. There's nobody's writing about it now. You know, 5 years later, because they're writing about what's happening now. It's like you've got you have to. The only thing you've got is your own interpretation. What it means to you as an individual, and I think that.
So for a long period of time after the Beatles, there was a period where people were still digging their own interpretations, Simon.
Yeah. Completely.
Before it became an industry where we were getting opinions from so-called experts.
Yeah, you know, opinions and kind of, you know, like us doing it now. But you know, when people start writing books about it and they start, you know, looking back at it from a distance, you know, through your binoculars, your cultural binoculars, your binoculars of 2019. With all those, you know, cultural references and all the things that you know about and you have ingrained themselves in you. You know, that's not the same as you put it. You know, that brilliant thing, that Chaz Hodges thing. You know, when Paul McCartney's playing him, you know, Rubber Soul, and he puts on the Yellow Submarine, and he's asking. He's asking Chaz. He's asking Chaz what it's like. Chaz is going, I don't know what it's about. It's a song about a yellow. I don't know what to think. Like, Mark, you know, but that's, you know, that will never happen again. You know, that kind of, I don't know what to think. It's a song about a yellow. which I think is a wonderful kind of, the proper reaction to, you put an album on, and you get Taxman or whatever, and you can get the idea of what that's going on, and then it turns out this like weird little sort of, I don't know, psychedelic kind of, thing, and completely, you're just, because it's new, no, well, you go, I don't know, which I think is, and you can never do that. We can never do that, because there's too much culture.
I'm getting messages, Simon.
You're getting messages from above, are you?
We're
stop that.
Hey,
now.
Look, I could talk for another half hour, but I got to go.
We've only just started. God.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'll look forward to
have a good evening.
next week.
Yeah.
Next week. Are we on?
I'll see you next
We're
week.
on next week.
Yeah. Yep,
we've had no one in the chat. We've had a couple of people watch us, but they've remained silent and they've been listening to us, so that's great.
That's you and me. What you got to remember is I'm watching it on my phone. One of those people is me.
There's a few shows on tonight. Dave R is on, and Johnny's
I'm sure
on.
that Johnny Bean's still going as well. Yeah, so that's fine.
But we're always just about having a chat, aren't we? So
yeah, cool,
awesome.
Well, yes. Have a good evening.
You too, my friend.
And I'll see you next week.
I'll look forward to you next week.
Lovely.
Cheers,
all right.
mate.
Take care. Bye. They're gone.